That Tuesday didn't start out so bad, but it ended that way. When I woke up in the morning, nothing seemed out of the ordinary except that my wife, Debbie, was not in bed next to me. I usually get up a little earlier because I start work at 8 o'clock, and my wife doesn't get up until 9:30. I finished my morning chores and was heading downstairs to make coffee for my wife and I when I smelled coffee already brewing. When I got downstairs, my wife, already dressed for work, was sitting at the corner breakfast table. She smiled at me and we wished each other a good morning. As I poured myself some coffee, my wife said, "I have to leave early for work this morning for a meeting. I'll be off by 5 o'clock and come straight home so we can talk as soon as you get home." That caught me a little off guard, and I raised an eyebrow and asked, Oh, am I forgetting something? What do we need to talk about?" Debbie just waved her hand and said that we would talk about it later, that it was nothing that couldn't wait. With those words, she got up, put her cup in the sink, kissed me goodbye, and was out the door before I could say anything back. Before I delve into this story, I should tell you a little bit about us. I'm Tim Johnson. My wife Debbie and I have been married for over 41 years. That's right. We got married right out of high school when we were 18 years old. We knew each other since second grade. We dated all through high school and both knew we were destined to be together for the rest of our lives. Neither of us had ever dated anyone else, and so we learned about sex together and were the only sexual partners we had. Heck, I had never kissed another woman except on the cheek as a greeting, and I suppose it was the same with my wife. We went to the same college as a married couple, living in a cheap apartment and working part-time jobs to get by. I had a GI Bill, a program created to help veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces, to help with tuition costs, and her parents were helping her out, so while it was a little difficult, it wasn't that harsh. We actually started our family while we were still in college. Our oldest child, Terry, is 37 years old, married, and has 2 children. She works as a family law attorney at an out-of-state firm. Our second, Darcy, is 35, single and works in Washington, D.C. as an assistant director at the Department of Agriculture. Our baby girl, Sydney, is 34, married to a police officer in our hometown. She is raising our 2 grandchildren and is a hard-working, stay-at-home mom. We are very proud of all 3 of our girls. After high school, I went to work as a risk analyst for a large insurance corporation, and Debbie became a grammar school teacher in the local school district, and then worked part-time in the administrative office. In our 59th year, we are both in great physical shape. We have both always been very active. I golf, swim, and go to the gym at least 3 times a week. However, my wife embarrasses me with her workout discipline. She goes to the gym 5 days a week and, almost every day, does long-distance running. I may be biased, but she is still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. She weighs as much as she did on our wedding day. Not bad for 3 kids and 41 years of marriage. When we were young, she was so beautiful that when she walked into a room, even the women would stop to gawk at her. To this day, she still attracts the attention of men half her age. But she always holds herself with dignity and class. Debbie and I talk about it all the time. Our family life is the realization of the American dream. We are so lucky to have found each other, and we thank our lucky stars every day for the life we lead. Unlike most men, when they hear the words, "Honey, we need to talk," I wasn't overcome with dread or break out in a cold sweat. I was curious, but after all, we have conversations all the time. We call them family discussions, and we had them even before we had kids. It was our way of planning our lives. But she didn't say we were having family discussions, did she? At work, I wasn't consumed with anxiety about the upcoming meeting, but I did rattle on a bit about the unforgettable lovemaking the night before. Debbie is a very perky and direct lover. She's not shy about telling me what she wants and getting her way. She keeps telling me that she would never cheat on me because it would take too long to prepare a new lover. After 41 years of marriage, we still make love, too, 3 times a week. As my curiosity was piqued, I left work a little early and headed home. I wanted to get home before Debbie so I could have time to change clothes, get comfortable with a glass of my favorite single malt whiskey, and find out what our conversation would be about. My curiosity turned to anxiety when I pulled into the garage and saw that my wife's 7-year-old Camry was already there. My anxiety increased when I saw her sitting at the table with a glass of wine in her hand and my scotch already poured and put in my place. She looked very confused as she kept rubbing her knee with her free hand. This has been a nervous habit of hers since I've known her. I asked if I could change my clothes before we started. She replied, "No, I want to do it right now. Please have a seat." I didn't argue since as I sat down I was sure she was going to tell me she was sick. I felt my chest tighten and it became difficult to breathe properly. As I looked into her eyes, I don't know what I saw, but I knew I had never seen that look and expression before. She seemed nervous and her voice trailed off as she spoke in a very low, deliberate tone. "Tim, there's something I've been thinking about for quite some time now, and I need to express it without interference. Please let me finish before you speak so that you realize how important it is to me." As she continued, she seemed to gain more and more confidence. "And I need you not to lose your temper and turn this whole thing into a childish scream. Can you do that for me, please?" I nodded my head slowly, not saying a word. At least she wasn't going to tell me she was sick, but I suspected it was going to get much worse, and I turned out to be right. "Honey, you know I love you more than life. Ever since I was in high school, you're the only one I've ever loved. There's never been anyone else in my life." My chest ached more and more, my breathing became harder and harder, and there was a nagging pain in my shoulder as she continued. "You and I will spend our old age together, cradling our great-grandchildren in our laps. We'll travel the world together, but there's something I have to do." The pain in my shoulder was now radiating to my left arm, and I felt dizzy. I couldn't catch my breath. "Tim, pay attention. This is very important." I just nodded, thinking that this couldn't be happening to me. "I've been thinking about this for months now, and there's something I need to do before I get too old." The room started spinning, and I felt like someone was standing on my chest. "I'm going to date other men to realize what I've been missing all these years. It won't last forever, maybe 6 months, and I'll be your loving wife again, proving to you every day how deep my love for you is." I started to say something, but nothing came out of my mouth. And then everything around me went dark. Light was coming in from the darkness, trying to break through the haze. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids must have weighed 2 pounds each. I struggled to open them and finally managed it. Where was I? What were those beeps? Why couldn't I move? My throat was really sore. What's my name? I must be in the hospital. What happened to me? All these thoughts ran through my head as I remembered that I was Tim Johnson, and I was in the hospital because my wife tried to kill me. Why was she trying to kill me? My brain worked a little better. I was sitting at the kitchen table. She was talking. Then I remembered the conversation. It wasn't really a conversation. It was that she told me something. She said she was going to kill me. As the fog in my brain cleared, I noticed the nurse standing by my bed, looking at me and smiling. "Welcome back, Mr. Johnson. My name is Nurse Smith. You are in Mercy Hospital because you had a very serious heart attack a few days ago. It's called the Widowmaker, and you're lucky to be alive. The funny thing is, I wasn't feeling lucky. It's 3 in the morning, and the doctor will be in later this morning to go over your condition in more detail." I tried to speak, but nothing came out because my throat was sore and dry. "Don't try to speak, Mr. Johnson. You had a ventilator in your throat, so it will take a few days for it to heal on its own." I was thinking more clearly now and made a writing motion with my hand. Nurse Smith handed me a notepad and pen. I wrote in large, bold letters. "No visitors," she replied. "Oh no, you had many visitors. Your wife and daughters were here." She must have noticed me flinch and went silent. I furiously wrote back, "I do not want any visitors." She seemed taken aback, but asked, "Are you sure?" I just nodded my head. I scribbled another note. "Do not share my medical information with anyone." Her eyebrows rose up, but she just nodded her head as I scribbled another note. "Is there anyone here at the hospital who can help me fill out a DNR, do not resuscitate form?" I'm sure I shocked Nurse Smith with that, but she kept her composure. "Your condition is not that serious." I interrupted her by tapping furiously on my notepad. "I'll pass on your wishes to the day shift." She patted me on the shoulder and quietly left the room. I figured my life was over anyway, so if something happened, why let the medics resuscitate me? Judging by my luck, I'd probably survive, but I'd turn into a vegetable, so screw it. Plus, it would be an added shock when my wife found out what I'd done and how much she'd hurt me. I couldn't sleep again. I mean, I had been sleeping for days, so all I could do was lie there, thinking and making plans. I said I was doing risk analysis for an insurance company, but my job was actually to help my company's clients do risk analysis for their organizations. It was a service my company offered, and many clients used it. I had been doing this for several years, was good at it, and was paid accordingly. In my experience, all companies are afraid of something, but my job was to make sure they were afraid of the right things and to offer solutions to mitigate those threats. There is a process for doing this analysis, so I decided to apply the same strategy to my problem. You know why my wife wanted to kill me? I know my wife wasn't actually trying to kill me with her statement, but damn near accomplished it. The action I just took will buy me time, and time is what I need to figure things out. As I lay in bed waiting for dawn to break, I began to analyze my situation. I'm one of those weird people who have a conversation with myself when I think, and this case was no exception. Okay, Tim, you've bought some time. Now let's think about the real issues. There was nothing unusual about my wife speaking very directly and succinctly, so she wasn't trying to shock me with her statements. It's just the way she's approached everything her whole life. What did she say? She had been thinking about it for months. Should I have noticed something? A change in her behavior? Had she given me verbal hints that I had missed? Could it be that she had already cheated on me? To all of these questions, I answered in the negative. Debbie is not flighty or prone to acting at random. She acts deliberately, but once she formulates a plan of action, she doesn't hesitate or babble, she goes for it. Another very important fact. She didn't say she wanted to date other guys, she said she was going to date other guys. So, Tim, you have a real problem that probably won't go away because she put you in the hospital. Shit. So, Tim, here are the options I see. 1, you can just let her date guys and hope that sooner or later she'll get it out of her head and we can go back to the way things were. 2, you can try to talk her out of it because, honestly, I can't imagine myself as a husband sharing his wife. 3rd, just divorce her and be done with it. Or 4th, you could just die and not worry about it. Honestly, option 4 doesn't look so bad right now. I still feel like crap. Obviously, I was wrong. I was able to fall asleep because the next thing I knew, daylight was streaming in through the window and the clock on the wall was showing 10:40. Shortly after I woke up, the doctor came in and explained that a widowmaker heart attack is caused by a complete blockage of the left anterior descending artery of the heart. He said I was very lucky because the survival rate for this type of heart attack is very low. If my wife hadn't been with me and called 911, I would have died. Okay. He was the second person to tell me how lucky I was, but I still wasn't feeling it. I asked him if severe stress could cause an attack like that. He replied, "Well, yes, severe emotional trauma can trigger it, but the heart problems should have existed a long time ago. It is caused by a combination of genetics and high cholesterol. Why do you ask?" I explained as best I could what had happened between me and my wife. He said, "Well, that explains your request for a visitation ban in the DNR. Mr. Johnson, you will be here for a few more days, but you will need a lot of rest during the recovery period, which will take some time. We were able to place a stent instead of a bypass, so that will shorten your recovery time. I can't help you with your personal issues, but I highly recommend that you see a counselor to help you work through your issues as you get on the road to recovery." Believe it or not, one of the most common side effects of a heart attack like this is depression, and with your relationship problems, I think you are at risk. With those words, he left the room. No goodbye, no nothing. I don't blame him. Doctors don't usually like to socialize with patients. Just give them pills or operate on them and then leave. Then another doctor who told me she was a hospitalist and listed all the medications I would need for the next year or so. It was a freaking pharmacy list. Yes, solution 4 was looking better and better. Shortly after the hospitalist left, I heard a commotion in the hallway. The commotion was caused by my wife being told she couldn't see me. Making a whole scene, she asked about my condition. We had to call security to have her forcibly removed when she was told that I had specifically asked not to inform her of my condition. For the first time since she hit me with her plans, I felt a little better. It's childish, I know, but it was a small victory nonetheless. Apparently the doctor, upon learning of my condition, prescribed me a sedative. Either that, or I was so tired I slept for over a day. When I woke up again, it was well into the night, and Nurse Smith was standing at my bedside. "I'm glad to see you awake," she said, trying to cheer me up. "Could you try to say something for me?" I was able to speak, albeit with a slight hoarseness, but thank goodness at least I could talk. She asked if we could talk, and I nodded my head yes, but only if she called me Tim. She laughed and said that was fine, and for me to call her Beth. She started the conversation by saying that she was aware of my situation and understood why I had instituted the no visitors rule, but was still concerned about the DNR request. I told her to forget about the DNR, that I didn't really want to die, and that I knew I would have to talk to my wife sooner or later. But I certainly didn't want to do that until I was sufficiently recovered. Beth then told me that she understood, but she had to kick my wife and all 3 girls out of the room just before I woke up. She told me what I already knew, that at some point I would have to talk to my wife, but given the circumstances, maybe I could talk to my daughters. In that moment, it struck me. How much, if anything, did my daughters know about what their mother had told me? The girls were very close to their mother, and maybe they knew in advance what she was going to say? Probably not, but Debbie was especially close to Darcy. Even though she was in D.C., they talked on the phone almost every day, so maybe Darcy was in the loop. Maybe Debbie told the girls the truth after what happened to me. Either way, I agreed with Beth that I should talk to the girls, especially since the older ones had traveled a great distance to be near me. Beth said she would contact them and ask them to come back to talk to me, but only one at a time. I explicitly told her I wasn't going to talk to my wife, and she understood me. I found it interesting that the girls returned to my room after only 5 minutes. Apparently, Beth had only kicked them out to the waiting room. I was sure it was all worked out by now, but I wanted to see my girls. So what the hell? I talked to each of my daughters that night, but told them I didn't want to talk about their mother. I wanted them to know how happy I was to see them and that I loved them very much. Tears came to my eyes, and I was very emotional when I finally realized how close I was to never seeing them again. Sydney let it slip in conversation that Debbie had told all 3 of them that she blamed herself for what had happened to me, but without being specific. I didn't argue with Sydney, and I know she found it interesting. She also mentioned that Debbie promised to meet with them tomorrow and explain everything. Terry and Darcy told me that they would be taking an extended vacation to help me recover. I was overwhelmed with emotion, and Beth had to cut the visit short. After seeing my daughters, I realized that no matter what happened to Debbie, life would go on. My life would become more complicated, but it wouldn't end. I just had to decide what to do about my relationship with my wife. Was there even a point in talking to her about it? Even if she canceled her dating plans, would I still be able to live with her? I needed to answer that question before talking to her. Maybe the girls could help me decide. If Sydney was right, Debbie should have told them what triggered my heart attack, so their opinions could help me. Cheating doesn't just affect a couple's relationship, it affects the whole family. In a very interesting development, my wife and daughters decided that after I was discharged from the hospital, I would stay in our house and my wife would move in with Sydney's family in their guest room. Terry and Darcy would alternate providing the care I needed for a few weeks. The doctors were confident that I would be back to normal in 5 to 6 weeks. I was fine with everything, but I found it very strange that during the first 2 weeks I was home, my wife made no attempt to contact me, not even a text message. Perhaps the girls read her the riot act and told her to back off. Or maybe she used this opportunity to go on dates. I just didn't know. But I didn't want to get into a direct confrontation. I decided to talk to Darcy first, since she had always been close to her mother and might be able to give me an insight into my wife's state of mind. Darcy and I met privately at the house, and she knew in advance that I wanted to talk to her about this incident. I, like my wife, am a pretty straightforward person, so as soon as Darcy entered the room, I immediately blurted out, "Darcy, how long have you known about your mother's desire to date other men?" We talked about it a little," she mumbled. not looking me in the eye. "How long ago, Darcy?" I roared. "I'm sorry, Daddy. About 3 or 4 months. My blood pressure was rising and I was already losing control of myself. It wasn't good. I needed to calm down." "I'm sorry, Darcy. I didn't mean to yell at you. I really need your opinion. It really hit me hard. I had no idea your mother was unhappy with our relationship. It literally breaks my heart." I tried to calm myself down a little bit. "Dad, she loves you very much and it doesn't mean anything. She just wants to experience something before she gets too old. It shouldn't affect your relationship at all." "Do you really believe that crap? I mean, Darcy, how can her having sex with other men mean nothing to me? I'm shocked you can say that. So you think I should let her have sex with other men so she can experience more in her life and then come back to me like nothing happened? Well, maybe not like nothing, but your love for her should be strong enough to get her through this. She's dedicated her whole life to you, to all of us, and she just wants this for herself. Really, Dad, you're 59 years old and you've probably slowed down a bit. It's normal for Mom to want to get to know younger men. It's a natural desire for a woman." Now that was a shock. I assumed Debbie didn't want to date older men, but hearing it from her daughter, I was shocked. It was all about sex. While I may have toned it down, I thought I was still doing a pretty good job. But I guess I was wrong. Shouldn't her love for me be so strong that she didn't need to date other men for satisfaction? So what if I've slowed down? Is that a reason for her to cheat on me? "Don't be silly, Dad. It wouldn't be cheating if you knew about it. That's why she tried to talk to you about it. We beat around the bush for another 5 or 10 minutes, but we didn't get anywhere. Darcy had made her opinion on the matter abundantly clear. I needed to end this conversation before I exploded." In an almost childlike voice, Darcy asked, "What are you going to do, Daddy?" "I don't know, Darcy. I just don't know. But there's no way I can live with your mom sleeping with other men. I'm just not cut out for it." I was well aware that Debbie would quickly learn the details of our conversation. We hugged and said our goodbyes. I thought to myself that I hoped Darcy would never marry, or at least tell her fiancé of her beliefs beforehand. My conversation with Terry was the exact opposite. She came into the room all flustered and spit out, "I can't believe that bitch is doing this to us." "Hey there," I said, bringing my hand up to her face. "This is your mother you're talking about, and she's not doing this to us. She's doing it to me." "Understand, Dad, when someone in the family cheats, it affects all of us. So yes, she is cheating on her family." Terry, you said cheating, not that she's gonna cheat?" "You really don't know, do you, Dad? She's been seeing men since you've been in the hospital. I think she was doing it before you had your heart attack. I don't think she's slept with any of them yet, but she's definitely bugging them." I suspected that after this revelation, our relationship with Darcy was pretty much over. It wouldn't be a surprise to me if Debbie was making dates. It was weird. I kept waiting for another heart attack or at least a stroke, but it didn't happen. All I felt was sadness because I realized at that moment that my marriage was over. Truth be told, I wasn't surprised that Debbie did that. She had always been strong. But why did she call an ambulance when I had a heart attack? It didn't make any sense, except in her own quirky way, did she at least like me? All I could do was shake my head. I wondered again, was there really any reason to sit down and talk to her? Terry and I talked for a while longer, mostly about the divorce laws in our state. In a no-fault state, it wasn't that complicated. All property is divided 50-50. Terry said I might consider a legal separation if I wasn't sure about divorcing Debbie. I told her I would consider that option, but I don't think it makes any difference. Terry also told me that while my wife could not prevent the divorce, she could delay it. This caught my attention, and I decided to seek legal advice as soon as possible. Terry said she would send me some recommendations for attorneys the next day. My conversation with Sydney boiled down to me trying to comfort her since she couldn't stop crying. She demanded that I let Debbie come home. I reminded her that I didn't send her away. She could come home anytime she wanted. The house belonged to her as much as it belonged to me. I asked her a couple pointed questions. "Sydney, did your mom go on dates after my hospital stay?" Although I already knew the answer, I wanted confirmation. Sydney only nodded her head and continued to cry. "How often, Sid?" Through her tears, she whispered, "Almost every night, Daddy. I tried to talk to her about it. I told her she was cheating on you and she said she wasn't because she wasn't sleeping with any of them, and besides, she told you what she was going to do. All I could do was just shake my head incredulously. Before Sydney left, I called her mother and told her that I was feeling better and that she could come back to her house any time she wanted. In doing so, I emphasized that I felt she should do so as soon as possible because Sydney would have a nervous breakdown if she didn't leave her house. I hung up the phone while she said something, but I didn't care what she said. I was ready for our meeting. Sydney had told me that my wife would be home at 1 p.m. the next day, so I spent the rest of the day preparing my notes. When going into battle, it's important to have a good plan, thoroughly tested and practiced, and I was ready for battle. Of course, the first time a plan is fired, it flies out the window, and that's exactly what happened to me. When Debbie came home for our meeting, she didn't just walk through the front door, she burst through it screaming, "Where are you?" My eyes had already rounded when she saw me sitting at the table with my notes neatly spread out in front of me. Without waiting for any comment from me, she, breathing fire, continued her tirade. "There's not going to be a goddamn divorce." As I mentioned, my wife was a school teacher, and history was her favorite subject. She was particularly well-versed in the American Civil War period. It was obvious to me that she was using the strategy of Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain of the U.S. 20th Maine Regiment at Little Round Top on the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg. Circumstances were such that Chamberlain's 20th Maine Regiment was on the extreme left flank of the Union Army and was the only regiment standing between Lee's Confederate Army and Washington. The fighting was brutal. Chamberlain's men were exhausted and almost out of ammunition. Their casualties were extremely high, and it seemed that all was lost. Then Chamberlain, in civilian life, a rather unremarkable college professor of rhetoric, did something no one expected. He ordered his remaining troops to attack. They did, and the Union was essentially saved. That's exactly what my wife did to me. She attacked when she should have been on the defensive, and I was completely stunned. The next thing I knew, I was lying on our bed on my back, naked, with Debbie on top of me. Much later, after completely exhausting me, she started to get dressed and told me that she would be back tomorrow with things from Sydney's house and that we would move on. As she was walking out our bedroom door, I said quietly, "Debbie, thank you for calling the ambulance." She nodded and said irritably, "It's because I love you, silly, and we're going to spend the rest of our lives together. Now get some rest because we have some time to make up." And went to the door. "Debbie, there's one more thing." I managed to say it with all the authority of which I was capable. "The first time you have sex with someone else, our marriage will be over." Gasping with excitement, she spat out, "Then we'll see. Apparently she was a fan of John Wayne, too." For a month or two, our lives returned to normal, although it was a new normal because she was still going on dates. We never said another word to each other about my threatened divorce. She never told me she was going on a date, but once or twice a week she would just tell me she was going out and would come home late. On those nights, she usually got home around midnight. She never smelled like sex, although sometimes she looked a little disheveled. She would take a shower, go to bed, and then resume her attempts to kill me with sex. I just got over it and decided that if I had to die, this would be a great way to do it. I knew she hadn't had sex with anyone else yet because, well, just because I knew. So one night she came home even later than usual. It was past 1 o'clock in the morning. I was sitting in bed reading. I could never sleep when she wasn't home. It wasn't that I was worried about her, I was just waiting for the inevitable. I heard the garage door go up as she drove her car in. Her CFM-heeled shoes clicked on the tile floor in the kitchen, and the stairs creaked as she walked up. When she walked into the bedroom, our eyes met, and I knew immediately. It was obvious that she understood that I understood. She broke eye contact and headed for the master bathroom, saying, "This doesn't mean anything. This is outside of us and will be over in a few months. There is no need for further discussion." And she closed the door behind her. When I heard the shower turn on, I got up and went into the guest room. Not only had I locked the door, but I had pushed the dresser against it. I wasn't going to repeat the mistake I had made at Little Round Top. Somehow I knew she wouldn't follow me. It wasn't like her. In her mind, once I got over my little annoyance, things would go my way. And I was right. I never heard a peep from her for the rest of the night. For my part, I didn't sleep at all. I had tears in my eyes, mourning the death of my marriage, and my thoughts were busy planning. For the next couple of weeks, we were more like roommates than a married couple. We were polite to each other, but just went about our daily routines and responsibilities. I know she went out a few more times, but I didn't know what she was doing. I moved completely into the guest room and usually slept when she came home. Yes, I did sleep. I found that as I implemented my plans, I became more and more calm and confident that I had chosen the right path. I never had a period of wringing my hands, oh, woe is me. I didn't wonder what I could have done better. I didn't berate myself for not being a more attentive husband. I refused to apologize or take responsibility for not being aware of all the emotions my wife might be feeling. In my mind, marriage is a contract. She broke the contract, not me. She never discussed problems or frustrations with me. She just told me what she was going to do. But the funny thing is, part of me understood why she wanted to experience more. It's a natural human emotion. She just didn't give us a chance to find an alternative. She made a unilateral decision that effectively ended us. End of story. I also understood why she made a unilateral decision. In the Western world, in almost 100% of marriages, the woman dominates to some degree. Ours was no exception. I suppose if I could find any fault in this mess, it was that I was too accommodating. But in our 50-plus years together, there was nothing to let her know that I would accept her behavior. I let her make most of the decisions about our home life because it made her happy, and that was more important to her. In fact, before we got married, we had a long discussion about our expectations of fidelity. There were no gray areas and certainly no passes. I was never close to cheating. I had never done anything that didn't pass the marital fidelity test, and I expected the same of Debbie. She was the one who did this to us, not me. A couple weeks after Debbie cheated on me the first time, I was ready for it. One evening when she left, I sat at the kitchen table where we held most family gatherings and waited for her to return. When she returned, I said quietly, "Debbie, we need to talk." "Not now," she replied dismissively. "I need to take a shower and get some sleep. We can talk in the morning." "No," I replied with an authority she had never heard from me before. "We'll talk right now. Sit down, please." She was clearly angry with me and sat down in the chair opposite mine with irritation. Her nervousness was obvious and was probably due to the fact that her lover's scent was coming off of her, but I didn't care. I handed her a manila envelope across the table and said clearly, "These are divorce papers. I filed them due to irreconcilable differences." At this point, she started to say something, and I raised my hand in front of her face. "No, just sit there. You told me months ago to sit and listen to you without interrupting, and I expect you to do the same until I'm done." She leaned back, rolled her eyes, crossed her arms over her chest, and stared at me. "These documents explain everything," I said. "In the envelope is my lawyer's card. You can sign them and return them to his office. If you don't do so within 3 days, I'll have no choice but to serve you at work. I don't want to embarrass you publicly, but frankly, I have no problem doing it where most of your lovers are. Don't worry, I haven't followed you. I have no pictures, no audio or video of you cheating. None of that matters to me." I continued. "It's very simple. In a no-fault state, everything is split in half. Our kids are grown and living on their own. The house is paid off. We pay off our combined credit card debt and move on with our lives." "Are you done?" she asked in her most condescending tone. I simply nodded my head. Standing up, she stated, "Okay, we're not getting divorced. I'm tired and I'm going to bed. Good night." The next morning, she wanted to talk. What's interesting is that for the first time in a long time, she made us a nice breakfast. She seemed pretty cheerful while she was fiddling around in the kitchen. When breakfast was ready and I picked my jaw up off the floor, she calmly sat down and indicated with her hand for me to do the same. It was getting surreal. I didn't sit down, told her I'd be eating out, and headed out the door. She didn't know that I was heading to an apartment I had rented near work, and that I had no intention of ever going into that house again, except to pick up my things when the divorce was finalized. I thought I heard her quietly crying as I got into the car, but I couldn't be sure. At this point, I wasn't going to continue the conversation. My direction was clear. She had never made contact with me, except through her attorney, and I had done the same. She didn't sign the papers, of course, and I asked to formally serve her at work, as I said I would. She got herself an attorney and started doing everything she could to derail the divorce proceedings. No amount of persuasion on my part or our daughter's part had any effect on her actions, but in the end, there was nothing she could do to stop the divorce. And 6 months later, we were finally sitting in family court with our attorneys. To be honest, I didn't really pay much attention to what was being said. I just wanted it to be over. My attorney told me that this was the only formal hearing I had to attend, and I was grateful. But when the judge addressed my wife directly, I sat down and focused my attention. Mrs. Johnson, why don't you want me to grant this petition for divorce as written? Everything looks like a fair distribution of property. My wife answered, standing up in front of the judge, dressed like she was going to church. Your Honor, a few months ago I made a terrible decision that destroyed our 41-year marriage. At the time, I was going through menopause and was not thinking clearly. I felt old and unattractive. Several younger men at work flirted with me and showered me with praise and attention. Sadly, I ridiculously thought my husband would understand and allow me a few months of harmless flings. I was stunned when she continued. He knew I had been seeing other men for months, and I assumed he was okay with it. I realize now that I was wrong. I stopped seeing anyone when he served me with divorce papers. I actually saw a therapist several times a week, and she helped me realize how wrong my actions were. I know I can't stop him if he insists on divorce, but I was hoping you could schedule us for couples counseling to try to repair our marriage. We have been together for over 50 years, and it seems to me that the least my husband could do is agree to go to joint therapy before giving up on our marriage. As Debbie sat down, she looked at me with a sly grin on her face. I was sure the judge was definitely going to ask Debbie to marry him, so much did he like her speech. This was not good at all. I looked pleadingly at my lawyer to do something when I heard the judge address me. Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson, are you paying attention? I asked you what you thought of what your wife said. She made a very convincing argument. Surely your 50-year relationship is worth trying to salvage. Oh, crap! I said to myself. This can't be happening to me. My wife could hardly contain her glee. My lawyer was scribbling something in his notebook. It looked like he was drawing a big screw with Phillips. I'm totally screwed. But then, an epiphany came over me. I was back in the fight, and the first shot had already sounded. I answered, Your Honor, may I take a moment to reflect on what my wife said? She really gave me something to think about. I would like to speak to my attorney. The judge replied rather good-naturedly, Sure, I think that's reasonable. Everyone in the courtroom felt like they were witnessing a real Hallmark movie studio moment. I quickly turned to my attorney, who by this time had finished screwing the screw with Phillips. What happens if I withdraw my divorce petition right now? Would he still be able to schedule counseling? My lawyer, who looked like Clarence Darrow, an American lawyer who, for ideological reasons, acted as counsel in many famous trials, turned around and said, No, he can't. The court will no longer have jurisdiction in this matter. One more question, Clarence. Who? That's not important right now. What would happen if I just disappeared? My wife would have to serve me to get a divorce, right? Yes, but it's not really that simple. In a year's time, she could get a divorce for being abandoned, he replied. Only if I get lucky, I said thoughtfully, and sighed heavily. Is there a law that says I have to live with my wife? My thoughts were racing now. No, there isn't, he answered in the manner of a lawyer. Then a light bulb went on in his head, and he asked, Will I still be paid? Of course, Clarence, of course. I smiled broadly, adjusted my tie, wiped my hands to smooth my pants, and stood up to address the court. Everyone wanted it to end like the Hallmark movies, and I was going to give them that, well, sort of. Your Honor, in light of the fact that my wife has spoken in the most compelling way possible, I am immediately withdrawing my petition for dissolution of marriage. The courtroom was a mess. No, there were only about 12 people there, and it was lunchtime, so those who weren't involved in the trial got up to go to the cafeteria. The judge banged his gavel, granting my request, smiling broadly and with tears in his eyes. My wife and her attorney were crying with happiness themselves. I was furious, but put on what I hoped was a happy face and walked right out of the courtroom. I walked to my car and my wife followed me around, mumbling something about us being happy, blah, blah, blah. I started the car and left it parked in the parking lot, perplexed as to what had just happened. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I threw my phone in the bushes and drove straight to work, where I went straight to HR and retired. I realized that I could count on my 401k since I had turned 59 and a half years old. I won't be able to collect Social Security for a few more years. But with my 401k and our other assets, I knew I could do it. From work, I went to our bank. I did all the things that people do immediately upon divorce. Our house was paid off and worth almost $1 million. Everything else we had was roughly equal to that value, so I was going to take it all, put it in my name only, and remortgage the house to Debbie. My family didn't know where I lived and only contacted me through work or by phone, so I had time to complete my plan unhindered. 2 weeks later, after making an appointment with Debbie, I drove up to our house, now probably my wife's house, in my brand new 11 5-foot Class A Georgetown motorhome. My new Jeep Wrangler 4X4 was hooked to the tow hook behind it and ready to go. I knocked on the door and heard Debbie approaching from inside. All 3 of our daughters were there too because I had warned them I was coming. I knew there would be trouble and I wanted them to keep an eye on Debbie. "Honey, you're home! Thank goodness we were so worried about you." The girls were already looking at the motorhome and were smart enough to suspect something wrong. "Honey, I actually came to say goodbye." "What do you mean, goodbye? We'll be together forever, won't we?" "We've always been together, darling. It's just that I'm going away for a while." "But Tim, what about work?" "I'm retired, Deb, and I'm going to spend some time traveling the country." "But honey, I can't leave the school district so soon, because school has started. I know traveling the country in a motorhome is our dream, but I just can't do it right now." She still doesn't get it. My daughters did, though, and they were stunned. They were already burning holes in me with their stares because they knew I was going to leave them to deal with my foolish, stupid wife, and they weren't happy. "We need to go inside and talk, Debbie. There's a lot I want to say to you, and I'm going to give you a chance to speak up, too." We all walked into the kitchen and sat down at the table. My breath caught at the thought of all the family gatherings we'd had around that table. The thought of this meeting being the last was almost unbearable for me. But for the past couple weeks, I've been thinking a lot about my situation. There wasn't a shred of anger left in me. I was no longer nervous, afraid, or tormented by insecurity. I felt calmer than I had ever felt in years. So I began the meeting. "First of all, I want to apologize to you, Debbie, and to you girls for the way I acted when you first informed me of your plans to sleep with other men. I know my behavior at the hospital was childish." I held up my hand before Debbie could get a word out. "Please let me finish. I know you didn't cause the heart attack. In perverse circumstances, you may have actually saved my life. The heart attack was bound to happen at some point anyway, and thanks to you being there for me and calling for help right away, I am alive and here today. That's what the paramedics assured me, so thank you. That really threw her off. I've been doing a lot of thinking since our court hearing, and I realized something, Debbie. Neither you nor I have ever been on our own. We've been together since elementary school. I think I understand now how you felt when you told me what you were going to do. I focused on the sexual component of your desire, although I think what you were really saying was that you wanted to be alone. You wanted to stand up and take your life into your own hands. Then I realized I was in the same position as you. Our whole life, all our plans were made together, and now I want to live alone too. I believe we both need some time apart to realize who we are as individuals." At this point, I let her talk because it would have been impossible to stop her. "But I don't want to be alone. I will never give you a divorce. We will be together for the rest of our lives. I was so screwed up when I told you all that." How she managed to say it through tears and sniffles, I don't know. It looked like she was going to hyperventilate. The girls, despite the tears in their eyes, remained surprisingly calm and quiet. "Deb, I accept that you will never give me a divorce, and I don't want a divorce anymore. For me, it doesn't make any difference, but we're not going to live together anymore. I need to realize who I am outside of us." I handed her a deed of inheritance across the table. "I'm giving you the house and taking most of our other assets, so it ends up being 50-50. The girls were openly crying now because they understood. Tim, honey, don't do this. I can make it up to you. I know that in time you will be able to forgive me. I haven't dated anyone in months. My therapist helped me realize how stupid I was. Please don't do this. You said you'd come back. I've already forgiven you, Deb. Maybe someday I'll come back. I'm releasing you from our wedding vows. I want you to experience whatever you want in life without any guilt. I just can't be here while you do this. But how can I reach you if I need to talk to you? You can't just leave me like this. It's not fair. She put her head down on the table, sobbing hysterically, unable to speak further. I turned to my daughters. Girls, I'm so sorry for what happened. I will always love you, and please take care of your mother for me. If you need to contact me, you can email me. I don't have a phone or mailing address as I don't plan on staying in one place for long. They were all hysterical when I got up and walked out the door. I got into my motorhome and set off into my new life without looking back, alone.